Marcus Thompson never imagined that a routine Tuesday morning would alter the course of his life forever. The 28-year-old security contractor had been working at the classified military research facility outside Denver for just 8 months. But he had already established himself as someone who took his job seriously, perhaps too seriously, as his colleagues often joked. The morning started like any other. Marcus arrived at the facility at 6:30 a.m., 45 minutes before his shift officially began. He believed in being early, a habit instilled in him by his father, a retired Army sergeant who had drilled the importance of punctuality into his son from a young age. The facility, known only as Site 7 inches to those who worked there, was a sprawling complex of concrete buildings surrounded by multiple layers of security fencing. What happened inside those walls was classified at the highest levels, and Marcus had learned not to ask questions about the work being conducted there. His job was straightforward: monitor the security checkpoints, ensure proper identification protocols were followed, and report any irregularities to his supervisor. It was honest work that paid well, and Marcus took pride in maintaining the highest standards of security. He had dreams of eventually joining federal law enforcement, and this position was his stepping stone toward that goal. On this particular morning, Marcus was stationed at Checkpoint Alpha, the main entrance used by the scientific staff and administrative personnel. The checkpoint was equipped with state-of-the-art scanning equipment, biometric readers, and multiple cameras that recorded every interaction. Standard protocol required all personnel to present their identification badges, submit to a brief security scan, and answer any questions posed by the security staff. Around 8:15 a.m., as the morning rush of arriving personnel was beginning to thin out, a black sedan with government plates pulled up to the checkpoint. Marcus watched as 3 men in expensive suits stepped out of the vehicle. Unlike the usual stream of scientists and researchers who passed through his checkpoint daily, these men carried themselves with an unmistakable air of authority. Their suits were perfectly tailored, their shoes polished to a mirror shine, and their movements were precise and purposeful. The man in the center, tall with graying temples and steely blue eyes, approached Marcus's window first. His companions flanked him on either side, their hands clasped behind their backs in a military stance that Marcus recognized immediately. These were not ordinary visitors. "Good morning," the lead man said, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. "We need to access the facility immediately." Marcus had been trained for situations like this. Regardless of how important someone appeared to be, protocol was protocol. No one entered Site 7 without proper identification and clearance, period. He had been explicitly told during his training that even high-ranking military officials and government representatives were subject to the same security procedures as everyone else. "Good morning, sir," Marcus replied professionally. "I'll need to see your identification and security clearances before I can grant you access to the facility." The man's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "Son, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're here on urgent government business. Time is of the essence." Marcus felt his pulse quicken slightly, but his training kicked in. He had been in situations before where people had tried to intimidate or pressure him into bending the rules. His instructors had been clear. Security protocols existed for a reason, and compromising them, even once, could have catastrophic consequences. "I understand, sir, but I still need to see proper identification and verify your clearance levels before I can allow entry. This is standard protocol for all visitors, regardless of the nature of their business." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Marcus could see their patience wearing thin. The lead man stepped closer to the checkpoint window, his presence suddenly feeling more menacing than authoritative. "Listen carefully," the man said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening tone. "We are here on a matter of national security. Every second you delay us could put American lives at risk. I'm going to give you one more opportunity to open this gate and allow us entry." Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his brow, but he stood his ground. He had taken an oath to protect the facility and everyone inside it, and that oath meant following established procedures no matter what pressure was applied. He reached for his radio to contact his supervisor, thinking that perhaps his boss could sort out the situation. "I'm going to need to contact my supervisor to verify your authorization," Marcus said, lifting the radio to his mouth. That's when everything went wrong. The lead man moved with surprising speed for someone his age, reaching through the checkpoint window and grabbing Marcus's wrist before he could key the radio. "Put that down, son. You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your career." Marcus jerked his hand back, freeing himself from the man's grip. The sudden physical contact had crossed a line and his training kicked in. He was authorized to use reasonable force to protect himself and the facility from any perceived threat. "Sir, please step back from the checkpoint," Marcus said firmly, his hand moving instinctively toward the panic button that would immediately alert facility security and lock down the entire complex. The man's face flushed with anger. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, boy. I have been serving this country since before you were born. I have clearance levels you can't even pronounce. And you're going to let us through this gate right now, or I will personally ensure that you never work in security again." Marcus felt his own anger rising. He had been called boy and son throughout this entire exchange, despite being a professional adult doing his job according to regulations. The condescending tone, combined with the physical grab for his radio, had pushed him past his breaking point. "Sir, I don't care what your clearance level is or how long you've been serving this country. Everyone follows the same rules here, and right now you're in violation of several security protocols. I'm going to need you to return to your vehicle while I contact my supervisor." The standoff continued for several more tense minutes, with neither side willing to back down. The two men flanking the leader had remained silent throughout the exchange, but Marcus could see them becoming increasingly agitated. One of them kept glancing at his watch, while the other seemed to be scanning the perimeter of the checkpoint, as if looking for an alternative way to gain entry. Finally, the lead man seemed to reach a decision. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and fixed Marcus with a cold stare that seemed to look right through him. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, son. I want you to remember this moment because everything that happens to you from this point forward is a direct result of your stubborn adherence to bureaucratic nonsense." Before Marcus could respond, the man raised his right hand and struck him across the face with an open palm. The slap echoed through the checkpoint area, leaving Marcus stunned and his cheek burning with pain and humiliation. He had been assaulted while performing his duties, something that had never happened to him in all his years of security work. The three men immediately returned to their vehicle and drove away, leaving Marcus standing alone at his checkpoint, his face still stinging from the blow. He touched his cheek gingerly, feeling the heat radiating from where the man's hand had made contact. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened and what he should do next. Marcus's first instinct was to immediately report the incident to his supervisor, but something held him back. The man's words echoed in his mind. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." There had been something in his tone, a certainty that suggested this was far from over. Marcus had the unsettling feeling that he had just crossed paths with someone with the power to make good on their threats. He spent the next few minutes trying to collect himself, reviewing the incident in his mind and trying to make sense of what had occurred. The three men had clearly been government officials of some kind, based on their vehicle, their bearing, and their obvious expectation that they would be granted immediate access to the facility. But even high-ranking officials were supposed to follow proper procedures, weren't they? As Marcus stood there, still processing the shock of being struck, he began to notice unusual activity around the facility. Several vehicles that he didn't recognize were positioned at various points along the perimeter fence. Men in dark clothing were visible at multiple locations, though they were too far away for him to make out any details. It was as if the facility was being watched, or perhaps surrounded. His radio crackled to life, startling him out of his thoughts. It was his supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, a former police detective who had been running security operations at Site 7 for over a decade. "Marcus, I need you to report to my office immediately. Danny will cover your checkpoint." The tone of her voice was different from usual. Janet was typically businesslike but friendly. Now she sounded tense, almost worried. Marcus acknowledged the radio call and waited for his replacement to arrive before making his way to the administrative building where Janet's office was located. As he walked across the facility grounds, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The men in dark clothing were no longer visible, but he had the distinct impression that eyes were following his every move. The morning sun seemed harsher than usual, and the familiar surroundings of Site 7 suddenly felt foreign and threatening. Janet's office was located on the second floor of the main administrative building, overlooking the central courtyard of the facility. Marcus had been there only a handful of times before, usually for routine briefings or performance reviews. As he climbed the stairs, he tried to prepare himself for what was sure to be a difficult conversation about the morning's incident. He knocked on Janet's door and heard her call for him to enter. What he saw when he opened the door stopped him cold. Janet was not alone. Seated across from her desk were two men in military uniforms, their rank insignia indicating they were colonels. Both men looked up as Marcus entered, their expressions unreadable but clearly serious. "Marcus, please close the door and have a seat," Janet said, gesturing to an empty chair positioned facing her desk. Her usual warm demeanor was replaced by a professional coldness that Marcus had never seen before. As he settled into the chair, Marcus felt like he was facing a tribunal rather than having a routine meeting with his supervisor. The two colonels studied him with the kind of intense scrutiny usually reserved for suspects in criminal investigations. "Marcus," Janet began, "I understand you had an incident at Checkpoint Alpha this morning involving 3 men who requested access to the facility." Marcus nodded, unsure of how much detail he should provide with the two colonels present. "Yes, ma'am. 3 men in a government sedan approached my checkpoint around 8:15 this morning. They requested immediate access to the facility, but refused to provide proper identification or security clearances. When I insisted on following standard protocol, the situation escalated." One of the colonels leaned forward in his chair. "Escalated how, exactly?" Marcus touched his cheek unconsciously, the area still tender from the morning's assault. "The lead man became increasingly aggressive when I insisted on verifying their authorization. He eventually struck me across the face before they left the area." The two colonels exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't interpret. Janet made a note on a pad of paper before continuing her questioning. "Did these men identify themselves in any way? Did they mention their names, their organization, or the nature of their business at the facility?" Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am." The lead man claimed they were here on urgent government business related to national security, but he never provided any specific details or identification. The questioning continued for another 20 minutes, with the colonels asking detailed questions about every aspect of the morning's encounter. They wanted to know everything: the exact time of the incident, descriptions of all 3 men, the license plate number of their vehicle, and a word-for-word account of the entire conversation. Marcus answered every question as thoroughly and accurately as possible, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow in trouble, despite having followed proper procedures. The colonel's questions seemed designed to verify his account rather than to gather information about the 3 men who had assaulted him. Finally, one of the colonels stood up and addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you to maintain absolute confidentiality about this morning's incident. You are not to discuss what happened with anyone, not your coworkers, not your family, not anyone. This matter is now classified at the highest levels, and any unauthorized disclosure could result in serious legal consequences." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was being ordered to keep quiet about being assaulted while doing his job. The injustice of the situation was overwhelming, but he could see from the expressions on everyone's faces that this was not a request. It was a command. "Do you understand the seriousness of what I'm telling you?" the colonel continued. Marcus nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir. I understand." As the meeting concluded and Marcus prepared to return to his duties, he realized that his simple Tuesday morning had become something much more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. The 3 men who had assaulted him were clearly connected to people with significant power and influence, and his insistence on following proper procedures had apparently put him in their crosshairs. Walking back across the facility grounds, Marcus noticed that the mysterious vehicles and personnel that had appeared after the morning's incident were now gone. The facility looked normal again, as if nothing unusual had happened, but Marcus knew better. Something significant had been set in motion by his encounter at Checkpoint Alpha, and he had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. 3 days had passed since the incident at Checkpoint Alpha, and Marcus Thompson was beginning to think that maybe the worst was behind him. The colonel's warning about maintaining confidentiality still echoed in his mind, but life at Site 7 had returned to its normal rhythm. He had been reassigned to the Internal Security Patrol, walking the corridors of the facility and monitoring the various laboratories and administrative areas. It was a quieter assignment than manning the checkpoints, which Marcus initially interpreted as a form of protection, keeping him away from potential confrontations with outside visitors. He was wrong. Friday morning arrived with an unusual bustle of activity throughout the facility. Marcus noticed it immediately when he reported for duty at 6:30 a.m. There were more vehicles in the parking lot than usual, including several military transport trucks, and what appeared to be a mobile command center. Personnel he didn't recognize were moving purposefully between buildings, all carrying themselves with the bearing of military officers or federal agents. Sarah Chen, one of the senior researchers Marcus had gotten to know during his patrols, stopped him in the corridor near Laboratory Complex B. "Marcus, do you know what's going on today? There are people all over the facility asking questions about security procedures and reviewing access logs from the past week." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had hoped the Tuesday incident was a closed matter, but it appeared that someone was conducting a thorough investigation. The colonel's warning about confidentiality suddenly felt much more ominous. "I'm not sure, Dr. Chen. Probably just a routine security review. Those happen from time to time." She looked unconvinced but nodded and continued on her way. Marcus resumed his patrol, but his mind was racing. If investigators were reviewing access logs from the past week, they would certainly discover the Tuesday morning incident at Checkpoint Alpha. The security cameras would have recorded everything, including the moment when the man struck him across the face. As he rounded the corner near the main administrative building, Marcus saw Janet Rodriguez approaching with a grim expression on her face. "Marcus, I need you to come with me immediately," she said without preamble. "Bring your radio and security equipment." They walked in silence toward the conference room in the administrative building, the same building where Marcus had been questioned 3 days earlier. But this time, Janet led him to the largest conference room on the ground floor, a space typically reserved for high-level meetings with visiting officials or contractors. When Janet opened the door, Marcus felt like he had walked into a different world. The conference room had been transformed into what looked like a military command center. Multiple laptop computers were set up along the table. Cables ran across the floor, connecting various pieces of electronic equipment, and several large monitors displayed what appeared to be facility schematics and personnel files. But it was the people in the room that truly caught Marcus's attention. Along with the 2 colonels he had met earlier, there were now 3 men in military uniforms with more stars on their shoulders than Marcus had ever seen in person. These were general officers, the highest-ranking military personnel he had ever encountered. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension and authority. These were not men accustomed to being questioned or challenged, and their presence suggested that whatever was happening went far beyond a simple security incident. The senior-most general, a distinguished man with silver hair and piercing green eyes, gestured for Marcus to take a seat at the far end of the conference table. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and when he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded thousands of troops. "Mr. Thompson, I am General Harrison. These are General Rodriguez and General Kim. We need to discuss the incident that occurred at your checkpoint on Tuesday morning." Marcus nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. "Yes, sir. Before we begin, I want you to understand that everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest levels of national security. The information you're about to receive could endanger American lives if it were to be disclosed inappropriately. Do you understand the gravity of that responsibility?" "Yes, sir, I understand." General Harrison opened a thick manila folder and spread several photographs across the table in front of Marcus. The photos showed the 3 men who had approached his checkpoint on Tuesday morning, but these were not surveillance photos from the facility's cameras. These were official government portraits, the kind used in personnel files or official directories. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to positively identify the men who approached your checkpoint." Marcus studied the photographs carefully, though he recognized the men immediately. The images were crystal clear, showing the same faces he had been trying to forget for the past 3 days. "Yes, sir. These are definitely the 3 men who came to Checkpoint Alpha on Tuesday morning." He pointed to the photograph of the man who had struck him. "This is the one who was speaking for the group and who hit me." General Rodriguez, a stern-looking woman with steel-gray hair, leaned forward. "Mr. Oh, Thompson, the man you've identified is Deputy Director William Blackwood of the Central Intelligence Agency. He has been conducting classified operations for the United States government for over 30 years. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The man who had assaulted him was a high-ranking CIA official. Suddenly, the mysterious appearance of surveillance personnel after the incident made perfect sense. So did the pressure to keep quiet about what had happened. The other two men, General Kim added, are senior operations officers within the CIA's Special Activities Division. They were accompanying Deputy Director Blackwood on an urgent mission related to national security. Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. He had not just refused entry to any government officials. He had confronted some of the most powerful and secretive people in the American intelligence community. The realization of what he had done and what the potential consequences might be was overwhelming. General Harrison continued, "What you need to understand, Mr. Thompson, is that Deputy Director Blackwood was operating under emergency protocols that would have allowed him access to this facility without going through standard security procedures. The mission he was conducting had been authorized at the highest levels of government." Marcus found his voice, though it came out weaker than he intended. "Sir, I was never informed about any emergency protocols or special authorizations. I followed the security procedures I was trained to follow." "We understand that," General Rodriguez said, "and under normal circumstances your adherence to protocol would be commendable. However, these were not normal circumstances." General Kim opened another folder and pulled out what appeared to be a formal government document. "Mr. Thompson, the operation that Deputy Director Blackwood was conducting involved a credible terrorist threat against this facility. Intelligence had been received indicating that foreign agents planned to infiltrate Site 7 within a matter of hours. Blackwood's team was here to implement immediate countermeasures. The information was staggering. Marcus had not simply interfered with a routine government visit, he had potentially compromised a counterterrorism operation. The weight of that realization was crushing. "Sir, I had no way of knowing about any of this. If someone had just explained the situation or provided proper identification," General Harrison held up his hand, silencing Marcus mid-sentence. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand that no one is questioning your motives or your dedication to duty. In fact, your commitment to following security protocols, even under pressure, demonstrates exactly the kind of integrity we need in personnel assigned to sensitive facilities." Marcus looked around the room, trying to read the expressions on the faces of the military officers. There was something in their tone that suggested this conversation was leading somewhere he might not want to go. However, General Rodriguez continued, "The incident has created a significant problem. Deputy Director Blackwood's operation was compromised by the delay at your checkpoint. The terrorist threat that his team was here to address materialized while they were dealing with the security screening issue." General Kim pulled out a series of surveillance photographs showing what appeared to be several individuals near the perimeter fence of Site 7. These photographs were taken by facility security cameras on Tuesday evening, approximately 6 hours after the checkpoint incident. The individuals shown here are believed to be foreign intelligence operatives who were conducting surveillance of the facility. Marcus studied the photographs, noting the sophisticated equipment the individuals appeared to be carrying. They looked like professional surveillance specialists, exactly the kind of people that a facility like Site 7 was designed to keep out. "The delay caused by the checkpoint incident," General Harrison explained, "prevented Deputy Director Blackwood's team from intercepting these operatives before they could gather intelligence about the facility's security procedures and research activities." The implications were becoming clearer to Marcus, and they were terrifying. His insistence on following proper procedures had not just annoyed some government officials, it had potentially compromised national security and allowed foreign agents to gather intelligence about one of America's most sensitive military research facilities. "What happened to the foreign operatives?" Marcus asked quietly. "They escaped before we could apprehend them," General Kim replied. "The intelligence they gathered about this facility's security procedures and research activities has likely already been transmitted to their handlers." General Rodriguez opened yet another folder and spread additional documents across the table. "Mr. Thompson, this facility conducts research into advanced weapons systems, including projects that are vital to America's national defense. The intelligence gathered by those foreign operatives could be used to develop countermeasures against American military technology or to plan future attacks against similar facilities. Marcus felt like he was sinking into quicksand. Every revelation made his situation worse, and he was beginning to understand why the colonels had been so insistent about maintaining confidentiality. This was not just about a security guard who had followed procedures too rigidly. This was about a potential breach of national security with far-reaching consequences. "Sir, what does all of this mean for me?" Marcus asked, dreading the answer. General Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus for a long moment before responding. "Mr. Thompson, you find yourself in a very difficult position. On one hand, you were doing your job exactly as you were trained to do it. On the other hand, your actions contributed to a serious security breach that could have long-term implications for American national security. The question now," General Rodriguez added, "is how we move forward from here." General Kim pulled out one final document and placed it in front of Marcus. "We have several options, Mr. Thompson. The first option is to treat this as a disciplinary matter. You would be terminated from your position here, your security clearance would be revoked, and you would be blacklisted from any future government employment." Marcus felt his heart sink. His dreams of a career in federal law enforcement would be over before they had even begun. "The second option," General Harrison continued, "is more complex, but potentially more beneficial for everyone involved." Marcus looked up, a glimmer of hope breaking through his despair. "We need someone with your demonstrated commitment to security protocols and your proven ability to stand up under pressure. Someone who has shown they can't be intimidated or corrupted, even when faced with significant authority figures." General Rodriguez smiled slightly, the first break in her stern demeanor since the meeting began. "Thompson, we're offering you the opportunity to join a special security detail that reports directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You would be responsible for protecting some of the most sensitive military research facilities in the country." The offer was unexpected and overwhelming. Marcus had gone from thinking his career was over to being offered what sounded like a significant promotion and opportunity. "However," General Kim cautioned, "accepting this position would require you to undergo extensive, additional security screening, specialized training, and a commitment to serve wherever you're needed, whenever you're needed." Marcus looked around the room at the three generals, trying to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, he had been a simple security guard doing his job. Now he was sitting in a room with some of the highest-ranking military officers in the country, being offered an opportunity that could change the entire trajectory of his life. "Sir, what about Deputy Director Blackwood? What happens regarding the incident on Tuesday?" General Harrison's expression darkened slightly. "Deputy Director Blackwood has been counseled regarding his handling of the situation. Striking a security guard, regardless of the circumstances, was inappropriate and unprofessional. However," General Rodriguez added, "given the sensitive nature of the operation he was conducting and the national security implications involved, no formal disciplinary action will be taken against him." Marcus nodded, understanding the implicit message. Justice would not be served in any conventional sense, but he was being offered something potentially much more valuable, a chance to turn a career-threatening incident into a career-making opportunity. General Kim stood up and walked around the table to face Marcus directly. "Mr. Thompson, we need an answer today. This offer will not remain open indefinitely, and the nature of the work we're discussing requires immediate deployment." Marcus looked at the document in front of him, realizing that his signature would change everything. He would be leaving behind the familiar world of Site 7 and entering something completely unknown and potentially much more dangerous. But as he sat there, surrounded by generals and classified documents, Marcus realized that his old life had already ended the moment he had insisted that Deputy Director Blackwood follow proper security procedures. The question now was whether he would let that moment destroy his future or use it as a stepping stone to something greater. The choice was his to make. Marcus Thompson stared at the document in front of him, his pen hovering inches above the signature line. The conference room had fallen completely silent, with the three generals waiting patiently for his decision. The weight of the moment was almost unbearable. He was being asked to make a choice that would determine not just his career, but potentially the rest of his life. "General Harrison, may I ask a few questions before I make my decision?" "Of course, Mr. Thompson." This is a significant commitment, and you should understand exactly what you're agreeing to. Marcus set down his pen and looked up at the three officers. What exactly would my duties involve? You mentioned protecting sensitive military research facilities, but I'd like to understand the specifics. General Kim stepped forward and activated one of the large monitors in the room. A map of the United States appeared, dotted with red markers at various locations across the country. Each of these markers represents a facility conducting research that is vital to American national security. Some are developing next-generation weapons systems, others are working on defensive technologies, and still others are focused on intelligence-gathering capabilities that could give us significant advantages over our adversaries. The scope of the operation was staggering. Marcus counted more than 30 facilities spread across the continental United States, with additional markers in Alaska and Hawaii. General Rodriguez continued the briefing. Your role would be to serve as a mobile security specialist, deploying to facilities that have been identified as potential targets for espionage or sabotage. You would assess their security procedures, identify vulnerabilities, and implement countermeasures. But that's not all, General Harrison added. You would also be responsible for investigating security breaches when they occur and, when necessary, apprehending individuals who pose threats to these facilities. This was far beyond anything he had imagined when he first started working in security. Am I understanding correctly that this would involve law enforcement activities? Among other things, yes, General Kim replied. You would be granted federal law enforcement authority and would work closely with agencies like the FBI, CIA, and NSA when situations require their involvement. This was exactly the kind of career opportunity Marcus had dreamed of, but the circumstances under which it was being offered made him cautious. What about the incident with Deputy Director Blackwood? How do I know this isn't just a way to keep me quiet about what happened? The three generals exchanged glances, and Marcus could see that his question had hit on something they had been expecting. General Harrison leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Your handling of the situation on Tuesday has created both problems and opportunities. Yes, we need to ensure that sensitive information about ongoing operations remains classified. But more importantly, we need people with your integrity and backbone in positions where they can make a real difference. General Rodriguez opened another file and pulled out what appeared to be a personnel evaluation form. We've been watching your work at Site 7 for several months, Thompson. Your supervisors consistently rate you as one of their most reliable and dedicated personnel. You're never late, you never cut corners, and you treat everyone with professionalism, regardless of their rank or position. The incident on Tuesday simply confirmed what we already suspected, General Kim added. You have the moral courage to do the right thing, even when it's difficult or potentially dangerous. Marcus absorbed this information, realizing that his career had been under scrutiny long before the confrontation at Checkpoint Alpha. So this opportunity isn't really about the incident with Deputy Director Blackwood. Not entirely, General Harrison admitted. We had already been considering you for this position. The incident simply accelerated our timeline and demonstrated that you have exactly the qualities we need. A thought occurred to Marcus that made him uncomfortable. General, what happens if I decline this offer? You mentioned earlier that one option was termination and loss of security clearance. General Rodriguez's expression became more serious. Mr. Thompson, I want to be clear about something. We're not trying to coerce you into accepting this position. If you choose to decline, you will be reassigned to a different facility with a clean personnel record. The incident on Tuesday will not be held against you. However, General Kim continued, you should understand that the knowledge you've gained about the Blackwood operation and the foreign intelligence breach makes you a potential security risk. You would be required to sign additional confidentiality agreements, and your activities would be monitored to ensure that classified information doesn't leak. Marcus understood the implication. Declining the offer wouldn't destroy his career, but it would certainly limit his options and subject him to ongoing scrutiny. On the other hand, General Harrison said, accepting this position would give you access to training and opportunities that most security professionals never see. You would be working with the best people in the business, using cutting-edge technology, and playing a direct role in protecting American national security. Marcus looked around the room again, taking in the sophisticated equipment, the classified documents, and the three generals who were offering him a chance at the career he had always wanted. But something was still bothering him. General Harrison, I need to ask about Deputy Director Blackwood. You said he was counseled about striking me, but no formal action was taken. How do I know that accepting this position won't put me in situations where I have to deal with him or people like him again? The question hung in the air for a moment before General Harrison answered. Thompson, I'm going to share something with you that is highly classified. Deputy Director Blackwood's behavior on Tuesday was not an isolated incident. He has a history of what some might call aggressive interactions with personnel who don't immediately defer to his authority. General Rodriguez picked up the explanation. The intelligence community operates under different rules than the military or civilian law enforcement. Sometimes that creates individuals who believe they're above normal standards of conduct. Part of your role in this new position, General Kim added, would be to ensure that all personnel, regardless of their rank or agency affiliation, follow proper security protocols. You would have the authority to challenge anyone who tries to circumvent established procedures. This revelation changed Marcus's perspective significantly. Rather than being punished for standing up to Deputy Director Blackwood, he was being placed in a position where such confrontations might be part of his regular duties. Are you saying that I might have to deal with similar situations in the future? It's possible, General Harrison acknowledged, but next time, you'll have the full authority of the Joint Chiefs of Staff behind you. No one, regardless of their position or agency, will be able to intimidate or assault you without facing serious consequences. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction at the thought. The idea that his commitment to doing the right thing could be transformed into a career advantage was appealing on multiple levels. What about training? You mentioned that this position would require specialized preparation. General Kim activated another monitor, this one showing what appeared to be a training facility. You would spend 6 months at a classified facility in Virginia, learning advanced security techniques, intelligence analysis, federal law enforcement procedures, and specialized combat training. Combat training? Marcus asked, suddenly realizing that this position might involve more danger than he had initially understood. The facilities you'll be protecting are high-value targets for foreign intelligence services and terrorist organizations, General Rodriguez explained. While we hope you'll never need to use combat skills, the nature of the work requires that you be prepared for any situation. The scope of what he was being offered continued to expand, and Marcus was beginning to understand that this was not just a job, it was a complete transformation of his life and career. After training, you would be assigned to a team of 6 specialists who work together on facility assessments and threat investigations. You would travel frequently, sometimes internationally, and you would have access to resources and technology that most people never see. General Harrison stood up and walked to one of the windows overlooking the Site 7 facility. Thompson, I want you to understand that what we're offering you is not just a career opportunity. It's a chance to serve your country at the highest levels and to make a real difference in protecting American national security. Marcus looked at the document again, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Everything in his life had led to this moment. His father's military service, his own commitment to security work, and even the confrontation with Deputy Director Blackwood that had seemed like a disaster just days earlier. If I sign this, when would I start? Immediately, General Kim replied. You would leave Site 7 today and report to the training facility on Monday morning. The speed of the transition was breathtaking, but Marcus realized that hesitation would only make the decision more difficult. One final question, Marcus said. What happened to the foreign operatives who conducted surveillance here on Tuesday? Are they still a threat? General Harrison turned from the window and fixed Marcus with an intense stare. That, Thompson, would be one of your first assignments after completing training. We believe those operatives are part of a larger network that has been targeting American research facilities for several months. The revelation that he might be involved in tracking down the very people whose escape he had inadvertently facilitated added another layer of personal motivation to the decision. Marcus picked up the pen and held it poised over the signature line. 3 days ago, he had been a simple security guard following routine procedures. Now, he was about to become something he couldn't even fully comprehend, a federal agent with responsibilities that stretched far beyond anything he had ever imagined. He thought about his father, the retired Army sergeant who had instilled in him the values of duty, honor, and service. He thought about the oath he had taken when he first started working in security, promising to protect people and property from those who would do harm. And he thought about the 3 men who had tried to intimidate him into abandoning his principles, not knowing that their actions would ultimately lead to this moment. Marcus signed the document with a firm, steady hand. The 3 generals smiled, and General Harrison extended his hand in congratulation. "Welcome to the team, Agent Thompson." The title felt strange but exciting. Agent Thompson. It had a ring to it that security guard Marcus Thompson had never possessed. "Your first briefing is scheduled for Monday morning at 0800 hours, General Rodriguez said, handing him a sealed envelope. "This contains your travel arrangements and initial instructions. From this point forward, everything about your assignment is classified." General Kim handed him another document. "This is your temporary federal identification. Your permanent credentials will be issued after you complete training." Marcus looked at the ID card, barely recognizing himself in the official photograph that had somehow been taken without his knowledge. The title under his name read, Special Agent, Department of Defense Security Division. As the meeting concluded and the generals began packing up their equipment, Marcus realized that his life at Site 7 was over. He would need to pack his belongings, say goodbye to colleagues without being able to explain where he was going, and prepare for a future that was both exciting and terrifying. "Agent Thompson," General Harrison said as they prepared to leave, "there's one more thing you should know about Deputy Director Blackwood." Marcus looked up expectantly. "He specifically recommended you for this position. Despite the confrontation on Tuesday, he was impressed by your integrity and your refusal to be intimidated. In his report, he wrote that you were exactly the kind of person America needs, protecting its most sensitive secrets." The irony was almost overwhelming. The man who had struck him across the face had ultimately become his strongest advocate for the career opportunity of a lifetime. Marcus walked out of Site 7 for the last time that afternoon, carrying a small box of personal belongings and a future he could never have imagined. As he drove away from the facility, he looked in his rearview mirror and saw the checkpoint where his life had changed forever, just 3 days earlier. He smiled, realizing that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as disasters. A simple security guard's refusal to be intimidated had somehow transformed him into a federal agent with responsibilities that would take him around the world. The strike that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of a life he had never dared to dream possible. And it had all started with his decision to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Agent Marcus Thompson drove toward his new future, knowing that the real adventure was just beginning.